Hi, everyone. Welcome back from the break. I hope you all enjoyed the coffee, enjoyed the conversations, and do remember that we'll have a drinks reception as well later on. You will be able to carry it forward with your chats. One of our last sessions will be about, actually our last session will be about how do we protect children's rights online in 2025. This has been a hot topic across many conferences in London across this year, and I think it'll be a really exciting conversation. We have great panelists for this one. First, we have the honor of Mark Russell, the CEO of the Children's Society, joining us. We also have Jen Persson, the director of Defend the Digital Me. We have Dr. Kim Ringmar-Sylwander, a researcher at the Digital Futures for Children Center. And we have Sonia Livingstone, OBE, a professor at the Department of Media and Communications at the LSE. Please enjoy the panel. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Really nice to be with you today. I'm Mark. I lead a charity called the Children's Society, which is one of the UK's largest children's charities. We work with around 75,000 children across the country. I'm not the expert on the panel today. These people beside me are. But what I'd like to do is say a couple of words to set the context for our conversation. Children and young people's lives are changing at a fast and rapid rate. And very often, young people themselves struggle with all of the change that they face. They're growing up in an extremely complicated world. Earlier this week, the government launched its first youth strategy in 15 years. And the Culture Secretary, and I should say a former Children's Society employee, the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, put it this way. She said, young people are living in a world where they're more connected than ever before, but paradoxically more isolated than ever before. And all of us have a responsibility, whether that's as parents and carers to understand and support children, whether that's as policymakers and government to provide leadership and provide the right experiences for young people, or whether that's as tech firms and businesses to ensure that platforms are safe and inclusive for young people. The last few years, we've seen changes in the law through the Online Safety Act, which has recognized the emerging challenge of keeping young people safe online. Every year at the Children's Society, we produce a report called the Good Childhood Report. We've done it for 15 years. It's the biggest piece of research into children's well-being and children's happiness in the UK. And the report draws on a range of data and a range of conversations with young people themselves. And what's really interesting is young people are really clear when they talk to us. They tell us they don't have an online life. They have a life that is lived online and offline. And that they've said there's no such thing as an online life for them. That there is no neat line in the sand. That their lives are complex and rich and nuanced. And their relationships are online and offline. So perhaps an interesting question to think about is, are we even, by saying online world, imposing our understanding on their lives? But young people have also told us that they've got a mixed relationship with social media, that it can have many benefits, like being able to contact their friends. It can also have many challenges around appearance, how young people feel about their appearance, and it can also have many challenges around bullying and discrimination. One young person told me that social media is a positive. It can help me feel connected to people like me. Another young person told me that social media amplifies problems and creates a group mindset that makes things worse. I had a 14-year-old girl tell me just 2 weeks ago that she was outed to her class on a WhatsApp group in her school. We know as well that more and more young people are dissatisfied with how they look, and girls in particular, that is true. And we have to ask, is that connected to what they're seeing on their phones? Then there's the whole question of AI. And we saw in the press this week that many young people are talking to AI as a way of addressing the challenges with their mental health. But above all, what young people told us in our research was that they wanted digital spaces to be safe, to maximize opportunities to connect with others, and to help balance time spent online with real relationships in their local community. Now, I'm sure in our conversation today, we'll talk about a range of things, from online safety to online governance, how we protect children's rights in a digital world, and how do we understand young people's habits in a digital space. Perhaps another question we might want to think about is, what is our actual whole society's relationship with the internet and with social media? And how does that impact children's lives too? So lots to think about, and I'm delighted that we are joined by a panel of absolute experts. To my immediate right, we have Jen Persson, who is the director of Defend Digital Me. Jen is a passionate advocate for human rights in the digital world with over 20 years' experience at the intersection of data, policy, and children's rights. She supported a pile of international organizations and been campaigning on data policy and children's rights for a decade in this country. Next, we have Dr. Ringmar-Sylwander, who is a researcher at the Digital Futures for Children Centre at the Department of Media and Communications at the LSE. And Kim's research is focused on children and youth and media, and particularly online hate, racism, sexuality, and technology-facilitated child sexual exploitation and abuse. She's worked for the UN, in civil society, and in academia, and has served as a government-appointed expert on inquiries in sexual exploitation and the effects of digital media in Sweden, and has led a government inquiry on the effects of pornography on children. And last but by no means least, at the other end of the table, we have Sonia Livingstone, who is a professor in the Department of Media and Communications at the LSE, who has astonishingly published 21 books on media audiences, children and young people's rights and risks and responsibilities, media literacy, and rights in the digital environment. She's also advised the Council of Europe, the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the United Nations, amongst others. Would you please welcome the panel? So, to kick us off, I'm going to throw the first question right to the other end to Sonia. Children's rights online are often synonymous with child safety online. How can we think about a broader range of rights, and what does a rights-based approach look like?
Thank you so much for the question. And just noting on my CV, I think the reason that I have this list of organizations that I've been working with is that increasingly organizations are becoming really interested in this question. The Council of Europe made an important recommendation on children's rights in the digital environment. So did the OECD. So most notably has the UN in its General Comment 25, which sets out how the Convention on the Rights of the Child applies in a digital world. And all of these organizations I can see moving as they grasp the interconnected nature of the digital world to a recognition of how children's rights apply in multiple complex ways across that digital world. And the digital world is a nice phrase because it recognizes that the digital has become a kind of infrastructure to our lives. And yet, as you say, this is our lives, this is children's lives. So the important thing about the child rights approach is it absolutely recognizes the importance of safety. Children have the right to be protected. Children can't grow up well and healthy as citizens if they're not safe. But by the same token, safety alone is not enough. And children have all the rights that human beings have because they are children, they are human. And so all those human rights that we don't often think about in relation to children, like civil rights and liberties, the civil freedoms and liberties, the right to expression, the right to assembly, the right to privacy, all of these are as important to children as they are to adults. And yet we very often look at children with an adult-centric lens. And I think that when we look at the adult-centric lens, we see the people who seem to us vulnerable, smaller, not heard, not in the room, as today, as so often not in the room. And so they have to be represented by us for their vulnerability. And so safety becomes the kind of the starting point, but also very often the ending point for how those not working with the child rights perspective think about children in relation to digital. It's also what the media headline, of course, most often is a kind of panic about children's safety online. And there is so much to talk about there. There is so much of concern there. There's so much that needs attention there. But safety, privacy, also equality and diversity, children's well-being, children's rights to participate, all of these cannot really be separated. And we see it both in principle, in the rights statements, notably General Comment 25, and we also see it in practice. So I've been at events run by, let's say, the Department of Education where children's learning online is a priority, but safety is forgotten. And then I go to a meeting about children's safety and their need to get information or to learn online is forgotten. And so I think in practice as well as in principle, it's the full range of children's rights, which is human rights, frankly, plus the right to be treated according to their age and development, their evolving capacity, according to their best interests, that we have to take into account.
Thank you so much. Kim?
Building on what Sonia has just told us, I've been looking at how does this then look out in the world, and been looking at how the general comment is being followed or not followed, or has been advanced in both on a regional, on a national, and on a global level. And we see great strides forward, but at the same time, we see that it's easier to make headway in terms of protection. So when we talk about children's rights online, or when we talk about children online, what we see in the regulatory and the legislative space is, of course, that protection is top of the agenda in most parts of the world. And we see other rights then falling behind in terms of, for example, the freedom of expression or participation. And of course, as Sonia mentioned, the kind of the challenges when it comes to protection, sexual exploitation, cyberbullying, harmful content, these are very serious matters, of course. And I think it's easier, let's say, for politicians to act on these issues because they feel that they are doing something visible. Everybody can agree on it, what it means. I think on an international level, we're in agreement also what it means to protect children from sexual exploitation or harmful content. Even though there are differences, of course, we're in agreement. But when it comes to when I look, for example, at how countries think about the right to freedom of expression, you'll see great variations. And of course, this doesn't only apply to the online space, it applies to other issues as well. But what we see there is that countries very often will forefront the protection rights or the need to protect children, but might do it so that they can control what children see, the information that they take part of, to keep them from accessing a wide range of information, which they actually have a right to. So what happens is that kind of the full range of children's rights is often forgotten in the regulatory and legislative space, even in contexts like the UK or the EU, where actually we've come quite far in regulating and upholding children's rights. And children are high on the agenda, whereas in many spaces, children are not very high on the agenda. We were talking about WSIS earlier, and we conducted a high-level expert consultation with experts to talk about, okay, how can we include children in the WSIS process, and what should we be considering, and how can we prioritize them, taking note that they haven't really been prioritized. And that's just one example of kind of international processes where children sometimes are forgotten, and often when they are forgotten, it may be the protection rights that are forefronted. And so what we want to really put at the top of the agenda is to say, actually, children should be always part of the conversation. Children should always be considered when we're considering issues that have to do with the digital environment, because as we have said, and probably we'll try to update this number, but they are a third of the internet users. And what we're seeing is that they're being more and more forgotten in many of the processes that we're seeing. In some spaces, we talk a lot about them, and in some issues, we talk a lot about them. So the social media bans for under 16s is very high on the agenda today. But when it comes to where are we placing them in central, for example, UN processes, children are often forgotten when it comes to where we see the digital environment going. So we're kind of trying to push the agenda on those issues.
We'll come back to children's voice a little bit later. Jen.
So I think it's really interesting to tie together some of these lenses through which we see children's rights, both the children's voice that we'll come back to, what adults see and policymakers see about children, and what parents and children see themselves. And we mentioned Australia, we talked about that earlier this morning. I think there was a 2022 report in Australia published, in fact, from one of the departments together with the, I think, e-safety commissioner. And what was also striking there was that the parents' perceptions of harms and risks for children were very much centric on the things that we see policymakers focus on, and that high media profile: terrorism, CSAM, child harms, direct harms, grooming, and really the worst of the worst, as some people call it. Where children in the same survey gave their responses, the harms they were experiencing and most concerned about directly, at least in this survey, was cyberbullying, name calling, and feeling uncomfortable about what they were interacting with others. And so I think one of the challenges we've got in this space is that children are often the lens through which adults have policy discussions and shape legislation, but in fact don't necessarily include or they do include, but they cherry pick the sort of findings and the surveys and the information that's out there about children's experience online to suit the direction of travel that the political agenda wants to take. And that's really hard, I think, for policymakers who don't know much about perhaps either sector, whether it's children's rights or the internet and digital sphere. So I think this kind of function of this kind of gathering and your expertise and here is really important to bring these two things together. And looking, for example, Alice Taylor's comment earlier today, when TikTok was shut down in the US, she saw, and their research saw, that children moved to RedNote, another Chinese-based platform, and were happily ticking away in order to get in the consent form, which was in Chinese. And so I think one of the things that'd be interesting to move forward from is not only what are children's rights, but how are they actually realized? What do they mean in practice? Because a lot of the time they're things that we see on paper, but don't actually happen in reality. And therefore, are they actually meaningful? And how do we move from that discussion of what they are on paper, what they might be in law, and how we actually see them in practice?
Thank you, that's really helpful. I'd like to come back to the children's voice question, if I may. And Kim, I'm going to ask you, how do we include children's voices in shaping the future of children's rights online?
I think there are many ways we can do that, and children have a right to be heard and for their voices to be taken seriously in decisions that affect them. And so I think actually on all levels, we do need to engage children. And I think, as Jen was saying, when we do engage children, when we talk to children, their perspectives will vary greatly from adults. So we have perceptions about what children need, what they want, what they think is scary, what they think is fun, all of these kinds of things. But when we actually speak to children, we will find something very different. And we talk to children on a daily basis and we learn things all the time. So I think including them in the design processes of the products that are designed or that they are using, because most products that children are using today and where they spend hours a day are not designed with children in mind or considering kind of children's full range of rights. So the design process is definitely one space. And when talking to tech companies, they'll say, oh, we have a youth advisory group. And I'll ask, oh, how many is that? Maybe there's 15 of them, but they have millions and millions, hundreds of millions of children on their platforms. And I would say that's not good enough. And we see that children in different parts of the world have very varied experiences. They engage with digital technologies in very different ways, and therefore their voices need to be heard. So there's often a global north kind of perspective, and global north or children in the global north are very often heard, but their experiences differ greatly from children in the global majority countries. So I think that those are very important. But also when it comes to the legislative and regulatory processes, we also see that children are completely missing. There might be an NGO that forefronts children's voices, which is great and important, but we see that children are missing from these very central processes. So I think starting somewhere is important. It's important that these processes are not tokenistic, but they actually weave into the decision-making processes, that there's some kind of accountability of also looking at, okay, how were children engaged, but also how were their voices taken into account and what kind of did that result in? I think that's very important. And when we do that, we do see that it changes the outcome in important ways, and the perspectives that are brought into the process change. So I think, yes, there are many ways we can do it, but it's important that we do it because we're not doing it. Yeah,
that's really helpful. We have a saying in the Children's Society, don't talk about us without us. And in all of our processes and all of our governance, we have 5 young people sit on our board who kick my butt at every meeting. And that's because children's voices are not optional in organizations like ours. Anything you want to add to that question around children's voice?
Yes, I was listening to you. You began the question with how. And I think those who don't do what Kim and I do, which is consult children and young people all the time, I think they genuinely don't know how. And so I just want to say, open the door. The world is full of children. And yes, of course, you engage with children as people according to ethics and in ways that are rights respecting as a process in its own right. But there are lots and lots of organizations who right now are incredibly strapped for funding, but absolutely delighted to talk about and involve children and advise and support any organisation in working with children. It's interesting that it's become, I think, mandatory in the health service to include those who are affected by services. Maybe we need to have that in the digital world too, and then it would be, as it were, mandatory to have your child panel as part of the work. Our centre is funded by the Five Rights Foundation, and they maintain a very lively and quite a diverse network of global youth ambassadors who we can often discuss with, check out with, and also feed back to the results of the different kinds of consultations. We're doing a consultation right now with the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights, who is looking to build a network to mobilise children's organisations around the world precisely to talk about children and the digital environment. This is a conversation children are very keen to have, and it's a conversation that they have a lot of very things to say which can be very surprising to adults who don't know and who don't regularly engage with children. They hate being spoken for, and I'm often told if children were left to their own devices, they would just eat chocolate all day and spend all day scrolling on TikTok. They would not, and they would do many other things, and they would actually have a lot to say about the way that adults don't always spend their time very well. But we need to consult them precisely on the matters that we are discussing here. They have an idea of where they can trust help, and there's no point us building a help service when they feel unsafe. If children don't trust it, children don't know how it uses it, or if it involves them revealing something that they've been doing for which they then fear they will be punished. Just following something like children's path to help when they are unsafe online through their eyes immediately revealed a whole set of ways in which we can build better with them and for them. There are lots of examples, but I'll stop there.
That's really helpful.
It's very concrete. Yes.
Build better is a good phrase. We run an event every year called the Young Carers Festival. It's the biggest gathering of young carers in the world, where 1,000 young people who are often hidden, who care for a sick or disabled parent. And I had a very surreal conversation with a 14-year-old girl in June this year at the event when I asked her what her biggest challenge was. And the 14-year-old said to me, "My biggest challenge is getting my mum off her damn phone." So the question I want to start with you, Jen, if I may, is what is our society's relationship with the digital world, and how does that impact children?
As that could be a subject of an entire event, couldn't it? I think I would start with that, with what's the relationship between parents and children in terms of, I will see it through the lens of my own work in data. I think one of the challenges we actually have in the space that you may be working in here is where parents are making decisions on behalf of children or making decisions without the child. And the relationship between, for example, the company and the child as a data subject, as somebody who you have as a customer or you have the data of that you're processing in terms of your system, is actually perhaps permission has been given by the parent. And I think one of the challenges we haven't really addressed in UK data protection law or anywhere else terribly well is two parts to this question. Is one is, how do we actually give permission which is valid and meaningful? And this varies whether it's a commercial service like some sort of game or app to public and state services where you must be there and you're not there on a consensual basis. And what does that mean as a child ages? Now, in health systems, we have the Gillick competency, a sort of assumption of capacity changing with age. And it's very important that's not an age-based check. It is a capacity-based check, as in most child rights laws, very much up until the point of GDPR. Everything around children's rights is capacity-based, not age-based. And that relationship between a parent and child changes over time. And we see it in, for example, the issues now where we're seeing changing digital environments and what does it mean to be safe for a child or a young person online in the States right now, where reproductive rights are being cracked down on, and access to information for young people is not necessarily a safe place to go if your information is being tracked and can be handed over from Meta or others to the state. But what does it mean when I get older as a child and my parent has given permission for something, and how I might not even know. I might not even know as a child. So the second question I think that's quite hard in this space that we haven't yet grappled with and if you've got answers on a postcard or it's something we want to follow up later, is what does it mean to have children's data? If you're processing something for a child, is it at the point at which the data is collected, or is it the age of the data subject as they get older? Because if you pick up data when a person is aged 8 and then they turn 18, are you still processing a child's data when you retain it for whatever purpose that was legal at the point of collection? And so we've got different questions here, I think, about the relationship between the human beings and the social relations between a child, a parent, a family, and society. And also then what that means for the sort of the digital environment in terms of processing information about children and the relationship between how that's handled between a parent, a child, a legal body, and a commercial platform, for example.
Gosh, that's a subject for a whole new conference. Can I throw a different question to you, Sonia? What would be the one thing, I'm going to say one thing, I realize you're an academic, so you could give me about 14 probably, so let's take one, okay? The one thing you'd ask designers and developers of platforms to keep in mind when it comes to keeping children's rights at the heart?
Conduct a child rights impact assessment. It's the one tool, it's the obvious tool, it's the tool that embeds all the other within it. It's not much there in UK law, but it is used. It's advocated by every child rights organisation around the world. It's there in the general comment. It's in the many child rights documents. So child rights impact assessment it builds on the idea of a risk assessment. It builds on the idea of impact assessments. Companies do them all the time. States do them all the time. Many organisations do. A child rights impact assessment says before, during, and indeed after you develop your policy or design your product or roll out your new mode of making the world digital, you think about the full range of children's rights, you consult children, you consult the relevant experts, you gather the evidence on what might happen, you monitor, you make sure that you're thinking holistically. You might have an educational product, but you make sure you think about safety. You might have a parental guidance product, but you make sure you think about privacy, and so on. So you keep the whole lot in mind. It's being used. We wrote a paper recently about 10 notable companies in the digital space who have been using child rights impact assessments. They don't do it perfectly. They tend to forget to consult children, which is a cardinal sin. They tend not to make the results public, which is one of those kind of double-edged swords. Maybe it means they can make more changes behind the scenes, but it also makes it less accountable. But it is the one tool.
That's really helpful. Anything to add, Kim?
Add something to what Jen was.
You may.
Yes, okay. So I've been thinking a lot about this question about what kind of digital world do we live in, and what kind of digital world do we want to live in, and how do we see children in those spaces? And I had a reflection about, so I think if I would look at how children interact with the digital world here in the UK or in my home country of Sweden, I can see a very highly digitized world which kind of makes up a basic infrastructure of their everyday lives. In preschool, they have digital systems from a very early age that they need to interact with. At home, we know that parents breastfeeding will look at their phones. Sharenting is a big thing. So it's a big part of their infrastructure. But when we talk to, for example, kids so what I want to say is that creates kind of an expectation of partly being part of the digital world, and we can see that their children are part of the digital world from a very early age, at least a big majority of children in kind of these settings. But when we talk to youth ambassadors in Pakistan or Kenya, their concerns are very different. So they want to go online for very different reasons, or particular reasons that maybe kids here we wouldn't hear about. So they're talking about, they go to school, the school isn't good enough. They look to AI, for example, to help them produce a better curriculum so they can learn themselves. So they use it as an agentic way of actually getting better. Not that children here don't, they would as well, but it then really allows them to create a career from nothing. Or a youth ambassador in Pakistan who tells us that actually his concern is not about AI, or it's not about social media. It's about just getting online because they don't have electricity in his village. But he knows that getting online for him is crucial for his future. Yeah. So these concerns are very different. Yeah. And so I think we think globally when we think about children. So I think thinking about what world we want includes not just that we want the spaces to be safe and inclusive, but we want children to be able to take part in it in a way that allows them to enjoy their full rights. And that includes the right to education, that includes the right to a positive development and to a brighter future, basically.
That's really helpful. I'm going to come to my last question at this point, and then we're going to get ready to take some questions from the floor. But the last question I want to ask for now is, how do we ensure that children's safety online doesn't mean exclusion? And I'm going to come, Jen, to you first, if I may.
So the area of children's safety that I've looked at is through the lens of safety technologies used in education. And so I'll speak to that. The technologies that are used to mediate children's safety in a digital environment through UK schools and in other countries in the world, particularly in the US, is a very broad area of technology, safety tech. Some of you may come from that sector. And we have been trying for a long time to get a lot of changes made to that sector, because what people tend not to talk about is how the technologies themselves can create new risks and how safe is the safety tech. So we've talked about it in terms of things like age verification, in terms of giving up perhaps security and privacy. We talk about what it means to have to hand over identity documents to another third party. So are you actually making children more safe by, are you simply giving your identity documents to a different set of companies instead of the apps or the platforms or whatever? But we rarely talk about who these intermediaries are that make children safe. And three concerns we have in that sector is, and I have to speak very broadly, not least because one of those companies got very upset when a newspaper article was published about them, and they felt that some of the criticisms in the article by the journalist had been sweepingly swept up to all companies. But I will say all of these companies are different, but primarily they work as sort of man-in-the-middle technology and insert themselves between the school's servers and the child as the pupil, using their device, whether it's a personal device or a school device, 24/7, 365 days a year. And they monitor every interaction, everything a child types, shares, sends, and receives. And one of the things that I think is most concerning, the three things would be that it's so opaque. Children don't necessarily see that these technologies are there at all, and if they don't understand how they work. Parents and teachers do not understand how they work either, and there is no visibility of error rates. So do they work? Do they actually do what they say on the tin? Are they actually physically doing what they claim to be doing, and are they worth the money that they're being spent on? But most concerning is that safety question. And we discovered this year that some of the safety tech companies actually have staff that offer, or the companies offer, a mediated service. And so it's not just the school's IT officer or their designated safeguarding lead who will see that interaction of what a child has typed. It might trigger a flag for either a conduct or some sort of concern around their behavior. But that keyword may trigger a screenshot to be taken. And if that screenshot happens to be in a child's room where they are having a perfectly either legitimate or consensual relationship over 16 with a partner, or could be showing a friend, for example, a new bikini or something, that screenshot may be taken and sent to the company and may be seen by the company staff, and then may be forwarded to the school or even to another third-party health and safety company. And so we don't have transparency over those systems at all. They operate entirely without real transparency or even general sort of understanding in the education sector how they work. And they've been coming from the outside. So I think we would question what is safe and how do we know that it is safe? And if you are going to have these interactions with very intimate, personal interactions with a child's digital environment, who has the oversight, the vetting process? Who are allowing strangers into children's lives? We tend to worry about that from the commercial sort of big platform sector. We don't actually question the safety tech sector itself. And I think we need to do a lot more of that.
Thank you. Sonia, this question of safety not meaning exclusion.
It's certainly a topic of the moment.
It certainly is.
So if the digital space was safe for children, then it wouldn't be a question.
Yeah.
And I think that's many child kind of safety and rights advocate starting point, which is what are we doing to make the internet safe, age appropriate? Actually, it's unsafe for many people in addition to children, but it is, so there's a problem. So why have we spent so long not getting a safer internet? Why are we suddenly at the point of public crisis about whether the internet is safe? So we could go back over 20 years of waiting for self-regulation to work and taking too long to realize it wouldn't. We could wait a bit longer, maybe, for the Online Safety Act to work. We have legislation in this country. It's recently come into force. Its whole purpose is to make the internet sufficiently safe for everyone, that we don't have to exclude anyone. We would need another conference to debate if that's working and what we think is coming there. And then we have to decide what we're going to do if we accept that the internet is not safe enough for children. And then the question is, are we going to put some public funding into building safe places for children? We put public funding into many things for children. We don't put very much of it into digital spaces. Are we going to accept that, as the banners would have it, that we adults can live in a digital world and make our way, or suffer or not, but children have got to go back to some pre-digital past and live in a different bubble, even from those in their homes and their parents? So these are actually some bizarre choices that we've created for ourselves by not building a sufficiently safe and age-appropriate internet. And actually, I don't think anyone can live with the children in the past and our feet in the present. And nor are we, because in many other areas of policy, we are pushing forward with digital in health, in education, in the infrastructure of children's lives, in the way in which our streets and public spaces are organised, the way in which our government and finance and commerce are organised. All of those spaces are unsafe present, and all of those are coming within regulations. It's a false choice, safety or inclusion. So we just have to, design with children in mind, because they are here on this earth.
Thank you. Anything further to add, Kim?
I think that I completely agree with everything Sonia has just said. And I think what we're struck by all the time is this kind of disconnect between an environment in which we all move around every single day. We spend a lot of our time, our children spend a lot of their time, that they use to connect with friends, to learn things, to study, all these things. And what we see, and connecting to what Jen was saying, they're all made by private companies, and that their business models don't match with children's rights. But we are having a hard time imagining an alternative, it seems. It seems that we are just always trying to keep up with the dangers that we see and the new dangers that we see. At the same time, governments are pushing innovation. Of course, AI is now one of those very significant areas. So we're pushing for innovation, we're pushing to move forward, make a lot of money, and at the same time rolling out environments that are fully accessible to children. And as Sonia is saying, we're not offering alternatives. And I think that is really what is missing. We need to imagine alternatives. We need to reimagine also what it means to create safe spaces. So regulation, we're always trying to keep up with, okay, if we do this, then maybe this will be safe. And I think we have come far in imagining how regulation and legislation might look in a way that could protect children, but also include them. But at the same time, as I think many of us might have experienced who have spoken to children about things like whether they would not be allowed to use social media under a certain age and so on, you will often hear, but wait a minute, why should I be punished because companies can't do what they're supposed to do, which is not abuse my rights or not use my data or not allow strangers to get in touch with me and send bad things to me or share content with me that I don't want to see. And that, I think, to me, is the voice that rings in my head. Actually, are we not thinking in the wrong way around when we're saying, no, we cannot regulate these companies in a way that actually has proved to be effective for children's protection? So instead, they are not allowed there, even though they're saying, we want to have spaces where we can connect, but we're not, again, creating those spaces.
Thank you, really helpful. And your turn. Any questions you want to ask the panel? Blimey. Okay, I'm going to come to the chap in the very far right-hand corner. Loudly, please.
Ian from the Age Verification Association again. Australia's obviously fascinating, and the one thing we can thank them for is putting in place academic evaluation before and after this change. I wonder what the panel's prediction is, good and bad, for what the impact is going to be on kids in Australia of this social media delay.
Do you want to take 2 or 3?
Just very quick response to that, if you mind. Would you mind, Sonia? And then I'll come to the next question straight away after that.
Well, they haven't included games, so I think a lot of children will be moving to games right now and chatting and meeting their friends and doing what they want to do there.
I would just say with our work in child exploitation, anytime you ban something for children, you give a criminal a tool to groom a child in exploitation. And if we went down that path here, I fear that the most vulnerable and impoverished children in this country will be offered incentives to get onto phones with apps in order to do things for criminals. And I worry there's lots of unintended consequences that we need to think really carefully before going down that road. It's chair's privilege. Sorry, chap just there. Thank you.
Thank you. Some very quick comments. You talked about the voice of the child at the start, which is obviously important, but I am minded, since you mentioned 5 rights, Baroness Kidron gave a really interesting presentation where she talked about brain development and perception of risk isn't really fully developed until the late teens. So I think we have to be careful what bits of the voice we take on board. On the worst of the worst crimes, yeah, I think you're right to call that out, but current stats, 300 million children a year, 14% of the world's children are victims of child sexual abuse and exploitation. So it might be the worst of the worst, but it affects a hell of a lot of children. And then on safety tech, so question for you, some of us are working on a new open standard to get parental controls to interconnect, because at the moment it's a fig leaf. Parental controls are an absolute minefield. They're all disconnected and parents don't understand them and they really don't work. So would you be supportive in principle of an open standard so you set, say, screen time once and it propagates across all the different platforms?
So, yeah, very as briefly as I can. Parental controls on phones are very different, I think, from school safety tech, just to separate those two out. I think what I'd like to see is what is done right now being transparent and open, and error rates understood and just talked about, and how things work. Complicating things with what's possible in the future often pushes discussion into the long grass of what we should have done 10 years ago or 5 years ago when we started. And a lot of things that are not necessarily lawful right now are just being delayed and delayed. I'd love to follow up that discussion and see where it goes and see what happens next. I think coming to the child protection work, we did a lot of work in 2023 with Child Rights International Network before we published the report, Privacy and Protection, a Child Rights Approach to Encryption. And we spoke to lots and lots of organisations, including NCMEC, Lucy Faithful Foundation and others, and huge amount of respect for all of that work, and certainly no way putting any of that down. One of the challenge around numbers, however, is that often people then don't understand or conflate what are duplicates, what are new images, what are live images, what is live grooming, video use, what is static images, what is photo DNA used for to do hash matching and so on. So numbers of them themselves are not terribly useful. What I think is a really interesting new development, though, is Childlight, the foundation, are doing great work, and I saw noticed that they had put £25 million into funding Interpol, for work, because they realised that there were huge amounts of numbers of photographs and images on police databases that were never being used at all to chase up anything, because they just didn't have the police feet on the ground and physical ability to go and do the police work that was necessary. And I think some of that is so important to not get away from when we talk about the digital environment and we're focused on numbers and we're focused on how do we do it on device and so on. It's actually what children really need in the moment is that child protection work that you speak to and so on. We must not lose sight of perpetrators being, real life, mostly in families, mostly connected to people that they know, whilst also appreciating things like stranger danger type things online. I hope that answers.
Thank you, really helpful. I have time for one more very brief question over here. And I've probably only got time for one response.
Hi, thank you so much. That was an excellent discussion. I'm Smaya Zahor from the Internet Watch Foundation. I have 2 disparate questions for the panel. The first one being about, we've been talking about digital IDs and age verification in an earlier panel, and you've hinted at that as well a little bit, Jen, in your discussion there. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are about the biometric data being stored for children when they are doing these age checks, and how do we have minimal intrusion into gathering information?
I'm running out of time. Can I just kill the one question? Thank you. Can I come to you on that one, Jen?
Biometric data is used excessively already in the UK in terms of schools, we've really normalised it in the UK in terms of fingerprinting, facial recognition in schools, really concerning area. And I think we need a lot more focus on that, full stop, before we start introducing it for other things. But definitely in terms of digital ID, I think it's a huge question, especially in an era where there is a huge parental pushback growing. I don't know if you've seen that in terms of anti-screen time, anti-phones, anti-children carrying a smartphone at all. What would that mean for having a digital ID? For those who are interested, there's a debate on the 15th of December of this month in Parliament on the Online Safety Act, and understanding some of these issues might be something you want to talk to your MP about if that's something you think is important. But in terms of digital ID, we have to have massive, better understanding what it's going to mean for children, especially where they're talking about things from cradle to grave uses, where that starts, who it starts for, how it's going to be stored, and also that sort of idea of what are we normalizing for children in terms of they are the first generation that's really grown up with all of these technologies from birth, even pre-birth. And what will that mean in that environment where their sort of entire life history has been profiled and categorized and stored? And why are we not doing things like already adopting things like data minimization, purpose limitation, all of the things that we already have in law that we should be using to underpin and realize those children's rights that exist but aren't necessarily being realized in law or practice?
1 minute, and then we're almost out of time.
I just wanted to go back to the point about parental controls, if I may, because you're right, they don't work, and they are often very badly designed, and the marketplace is completely confusing to parents. The reason I wanted to go back is very often in these debates, though not necessarily now, we come to a point of saying, look, can't the parents just fix this? This is not for us to do, this is for the parents to manage. And yet the tools that we're providing parents to manage are deeply flawed and no evidence there. But the information that we're providing for parents isn't adequate either. And as so often, anything that relies on parents, and I don't want this to sound wrong, but does generate inequalities because many parents are just not able to follow in the detail and pay the attention that might be needed.
Thank you so much. We did a survey last year of 4,000 parents, and we asked them about what their children look at on their phones. And 92% of the parents we surveyed said they were worried that their child was at risk of being groomed or exploited online. 4% of parents had a clue what the signs of that would be, and 2% of parents knew what to do if they were concerned their child was being groomed online. So we have a big job to do, and we're working really closely with the Home Office about how we educate families and how we educate schools to help children protect themselves in the online space. But I'm going to finish with my 12-year-old nephew, Noah. When I asked him what he thought about the Australia decision, his exact response was, why should I be banned from Instagram because they can't keep it safe? Which I thought was a good note with which to finish. Would you please show your appreciation to our superb and excellent panel?